Alright, hello and welcome to Fanciest Man of Cornwood's channel here. Today we're going to do a deck tech about a commander I think is really interesting, Nin the Pain Artist. I've seen this commander done a few times where it's used as interaction with an opponent. I don't want to be doing that today. Today I want to look at a way to kind of have Nin work for you, to get that card draw for you, and then also to benefit from that card draw. So a little bit of just an overview of my build of the deck. This deck lets me use one of my favorite kind of sets of creatures in Magic, which are these pingers. If you're an old school player or someone that came up with 4th edition or any of these where Prodigal Sorcerer was one of the cards that you could draft and wind up cracking in packs and things like that, that was quite a feeling back in the day. We didn't understand that 3 mana to be able to ping for 1 damage was maybe not that great. And so, yeah, it's just a card I've got a lot of nostalgia for. But in this deck, we're actually going to run a whole suite of these pingers. And that's because we're including multiple payoffs for pinging our own creatures. Not just with Nin's ability, which of course is going to give us card draw, but also just to benefit from the different abilities that these creatures have. So you can see that second column has got some of those. Body of Knowledge is a great way to draw cards. With Nin, you're basically deviling your card draw, so that can refill your hand quickly at instant speed, which is always nice. Silverclad Ferocidons is a way to get your opponents to have to start sacking their permanents. So it's probably not something we're going to play out very early on, but toward the end of the game, Ferocidons, once you have your board built up, can be quite a beatdown. Wrathful Red Dragon is a way to take the damage that we're doing to our own creatures and actually spread that around and start affecting our opponent's board with it as well. And then not only are we going to use these creatures as targets for Nin to get card draw, we want to make sure we're benefiting from that card draw too. So we've got Chasm Skulker, which will get bigger and then make a bunch of smaller creatures. We're actually going to run both the Niv Mizzets, which we'll get to a little bit later in the breakdown, and then Psychosis Crawler is just an example of how to use that card draw to start forcing out your opponents and doing a ton of damage over time. So we've got some utility cards. Mind Over Matter is just kind of a favorite pet card that's from a classic set. Probably a little hard to get a hold of, but easy to proxy, and one that really has a lot of synergy with the deck because you can get into situations like Body of Knowledge where you're just drawing cards, discarding them to draw more, and then obviously there's some combo potential there with cards like Psychosis Crawler. So let's look at our pingers. We've got 14 overall. This number can be reduced if you want to make the deck a little bit closer to a CEDH deck or a deck that's got more interaction in it. I like this number because the play group I happen to play with is not one that is super competitive. We don't tend to run tons of interaction. We kind of like to goldfish or do our own thing and interact at really crucial moments. But yeah, there's a lot of really good pingers here that actually have some other upside as well. Staff of Nin is an artifact that's going to draw you cards in addition to having that pinging ability, which is kind of nice. It's a little bit less fragile than the creatures, which can be useful as well. Inbringer is a bit expensive for one of these pingers, but it's going to untap each turn, and it's got some upside as well. We do have ways to make that colorless mana in our ramp package, as well as some of the utility lands we have, so I don't think it's a very big trade-off to run that and just have access to all these instant speed kind of utility abilities. So Goblin Sharpshooter and Izzet Staticaster, really these are in here to combat a lot of the token strategies. You know, if an opponent starts going off and making 1/1s especially, these can be devastating for those boards. So being able to drop those, maybe give them haste with some of the other utility cards we have is going to be a line that feels really good when your opponent starts dropping soldiers or even saprolings or just any of the really small 0/1 or 1/1 tokens. All right. These are our damage targets. So this is where we're going to spread around our damage and really get tons of value A lot of it comes from Nin because of that card draw that's stapled to her ability. You know, it's worth ramping up to use that and refill your hand, especially if you're down on interaction or something like that. But a lot of these just have a lot of good utility too, like the Ferocidons. Zalto's kind of an interesting one. You know, the dungeon mechanic, I think, gets kind of rightly maligned a bit, but you can certainly build up advantage over time. And, you know, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, once you have enough of those pingers out, it's really not a hard dungeon to run through for this deck, and you get a ton of value in that dungeon. The final trigger alone is going to draw you cards and let you cast some of these bigger payoffs for free. So, always something to look at. I like the Coal Hauler Swine. It's a little expensive for a 4/4 body that does what it does, but again, being able to spread damage around, we're basically a deck that wants to just win that damage race and hit our opponents as much as possible with it. So if we can use that to do it, or the Sun Crowned Hunters to do it, then that's just going to speed up our clock a little bit. So I want to look at some draw payoffs too. So between Nin and Body of Knowledge and just a lot of the ways this deck interacts, we can wind up drawing 10, 20 cards fairly easily in a turn. It's not uncommon at all, so we want to make sure we have ways to make that card draw give us extra utility and also just to hurt our opponents. We've looked at Chasm Skulker. We have both Niv Mizzets in here, which famously, you know, there's some infinite combos there with Niv Mizzet. That's really not the point of the deck, but if you get into one of those and you've got a stalemated board or something like that, then it can feel pretty good to pull that out in the late game and use that as like a finishing blow for whatever you're doing. Ominous Seas is something that just can make huge bodies for you, can make those bodies at instant speed, which is really nice. You can save a bunch of counters on there, and if someone tries to remove it, or if someone tries to attack in on the ground, then you're able to make a bunch of bodies at instant speed and block or do whatever you need to do. You can also use it on an opponent's instep before your turn and wind up taking out a player or two with those 8/8 bodies. Let's see. Oneirophage. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Oneirophage. It's just a flyer that gets really big, you know, together with the damage over time that you're probably going to be doing incidentally and that you can do with your pingers and kind of big groups of them pointing their abilities at an opponent. You know, Oneirophage can get big. It can swing in for that final bit of damage. It's just really nice to have around. And then we've got Psychosis Crawler. Again, group slug. It's going to make sure every opponent, whenever you're drawing those cards, is just getting closer to that ticking clock of you winning the game. And then our last three, the 2 tutelage cards and Psychic Corrosion, just good ways to kind of get value, especially in the late game. You know, once opponents have started drawing through their decks, we only need to draw a set number of cards to actually mill out at least 1 or 2 players, and these cards will do that. Sphinx's Tutelage, obviously in a deck that's monocolored or has a lot of the same color, it's maybe running a side theme with its second color, you know, Sphinx's Tutelage can get out of control and just mill out that opponent and close out the game. All right, looking at untappers, so a lot of these cards are in here because of their flexibility. We like to use the untappers on Nin, obviously, because it's just a great way to get multiple value out of her and our damage targets, but you can also use a lot of these to untap ramp artifacts. You can use them to untap a ramp creature that we're running in the deck. And then Mind Over Matter can be a combo piece, because when you're drawing all those cards, you can just keep untapping the Pinger or Nin or whatever is causing you to draw those cards. Body of Knowledge, again, can be a really fun combo with that, because obviously you can draw as many cards as you want. You can draw your whole deck if you want to. And then 1,000-Year Elixir, I'll point this one out. It gives all of your creatures with activated abilities the ability to use them as if they had haste. Obviously that can be a pretty big win, because you can bring things down and immediately have huge turns kind of out of nowhere with creatures that otherwise you'd have to wait a turn just to be able to tap them and start going off that way. Let's see, and then there's a few spells that are going to untap everything. These are really for those big turns where you've got a board state set up that will punish your opponents for draw or something like that. Dramatic Reversal and Turnabout can both do that, and yeah, that can be a huge way to swing the game. I'll also point out that Turnabout, Turnabout and Dramatic Reversal work really well with Ominous Seas as well. If you can make all those Krakens at instant speed, swing at someone, then you can use one of these to untap them all and counter a big attack that's coming back at you as well. So, yeah, just really fun interaction, lots of ways to deal with things that are affecting the board, and then a lot of ways to reuse whatever you've put out and keep building your board state up. All right, now obviously to do all that, we need quite a bit of ramp, and this deck does run a lot. It runs 11 pieces of ramp. I'll say obviously the Mana Vault, you can replace that with a different rock. You could certainly replace it with any of the 3 mana kind of generic ramp spells, or a ramp artifacts is what I'm trying to say. So it's not necessarily a card that has to be in the deck. I know it's expensive, but you can also proxy it, and I would proxy it for this deck. All the untappers that we run make it really worth having that artifact that can make 3 colorless, and this is obviously probably the best version of it. So the only other card I'll really point out specifically, we've got some cards that have utility in that they can draw you more cards, like the Hedron Archive, the Dreamstone Hedron. You know, those are just good cards to have lying around once you have a later game state or maybe mid-game state that's starting to stall. Apprentice Wizard is a card that I don't think gets a lot of love, but really gives you an ability in blue to ramp that's kind of unheard of, especially if you have untappers out. You know, that's a card that can make a ton of mana kind of out of nowhere. I don't think people will really be expecting blue to be able to put up this kind of mana without being in Simic or kind of running the typical combo pieces for that. So yeah, just a nice card to have around. Fragile body, but you'll see when we get to our next set of cards that there's some ways to protect cards like that. And that's our utility and our interaction. Now I would say, again, if you wanted to make this deck more competitive, if you wanted to kind of up its power, one of the first things you could do is trim some of the other areas and add even more interaction. A lot of this utility is meant more to protect our board and provide things indestructible, things like that. There's a few pieces here like the Basilisk Collar that give things Death Touch, and obviously with pingers that's just a way to control as much of the board as you possibly can. Blazing Sunsteel is a card that is on the expensive side. It's certainly expensive to equip, so you probably won't be equipping it many times, but if you can get it onto the right creature that's already a target for your damage, then that's just another way to spread damage around. And if you can manage to equip this and a Death Touch artifact or equipment onto one of those targets, then you're really going to be getting value, because you will be picking things off and getting some benefit out of the damage target's trigger as well. So we've got some card draw, Devilers like Alharmrit's Archive, Teferi's Ageless Insight. You can run more of those. I think there might be a few more in the format. I don't really find that it's a problem to draw cards in this deck, especially once you really get your board state set up. Nin's capable of just making those turns explosive and drawing you tons of cards without really working too hard at it. The indestructible artifacts, Darksteel Plate, and then the Hammer of Nizan. These are just great cards to be able to throw on Nin. Obviously, she's pretty pivotal to the deck. We want to protect her as much as possible, but also to throw on some of your damage targets. You know, Zalto is one that really benefits from being able to toughen up a bit and take more damage in a turn. Frozen Solid is a nice removal spell because you put it on a creature, make sure you've tapped it down, and then basically whenever you want, with all our pingers, you can just hit it for single damage and take it out, as long as it's not indestructible. So just a nice piece of removal to have around. Sublime Epiphany. This is a bit of a pet card. I'm not going to lie. I just like this card. I think it has so many modes that benefit your deck in different ways. It adds so much flexibility to how you continue building your board state, and the fact that you can counter a spell while you're doing that is just kind of crazy. So I don't like holding up 6 mana too much, but in this deck you're going to be holding that up with Nin quite a bit, just to be able to act as late as possible, give yourself as much flexibility as possible. And so I don't think it's a big deal to hold that up and just have Epiphany be kind of an option and a way to build up your board. So Wizard class, I think, is the only one I haven't mentioned yet, and this is just a way to get our hand size to unlimited. There's also, you'll see on the next one, there's a Reliquary Tower. There's another way to do that, but if you do happen to get to this last level of Wizard class, I don't think we'll do it very often, but we have enough mana where it happens every once in a while, and it can definitely make a creature huge, and putting that on an evasive creature, or maybe a creature with trample like Zalto, can feel really good. All right, and lastly, these are the utility lands I have in my build of this deck. I don't think any of these are actually necessary for the deck. I think land bases in Commander are really the most malleable part of it. Now, obviously, some of them are really nice to have, especially Reliquary Tower. You want that infinite hand size, maximum hand size, if you can get it to just give yourself as many options as possible, keep your flexibility, and then not have to discard cards that might be useful later. Tyrite Sanctum is really nice with Nin. She's a 1/1. She's fragile. We want to be able to get her indestructible somehow, and just get her more survivability, and that is it's an expensive way to do it, Tyrite Sanctum, but with our ramp, it's really not too big a deal. We've got a few ways where we can use our lands to just act as other pingers and deal that damage. Desert does that really easily as long as we can attack into somebody. Balduvian Trading Post is kind of a crazy old card from Alliances, but it does do the trick, and giving up a mountain for that typically isn't too big a deal, so I did go ahead and include it, but obviously you don't have to. Let's see, I like that Arena of Glory and Flamekin Village give us that flexibility with haste. We like that, especially with some of our bigger creatures. We've got a 7/7 that we can untap and swing in with. We've got Zalto that is a big body and can swing in and do a lot of damage. So yeah, we like having that flexibility. Manamo is just another untapper. It'll untap Nin for us, and that's always nice to have. Let's see, Halimar Depths, just a solid way to get that card selection early in the game. And it's not something that really hurts us if we draw it later, even though it's a tap land. It just maybe slows us down a tiny bit. All right, and the last card to point out, last 2 cards, Path of Ancestry. We have a lot of wizards. We don't have a lot of Vidalkins, but that's okay, because wizard is the type that we're looking at there. This is a land that can give us both kinds of mana and just give us a little bonus when we cast in and a lot of our pingers. So Abstergo, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly because I don't really know Assassin's Creed very well, but Abstergo Entertainment, I just think this is a nice way to have graveyard hate, and is it? I don't think we see that a lot outside of artifacts that are really dedicated to that, so to be able to have this, it can filter mana, which, that's not amazing in Commander, but it also makes colorless, which is good for our Inbringer, and which, helps us get out our ramp artifacts quicker, so. All right, so that is the deck, guys. There's a deck list in the description if you want to get a closer look at it. Obviously, stick around my channel if you'd like to see more deck techs. Leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of the breakdown. If there's anything that you'd like to see differently in future videos, let me know. And whenever I stream, I'll be putting some notifications on my YouTube page for that as well. So be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, thank you so much. Have a great day, and keep playing Commander.